on my top left is Peggy Kishnick. I don't know where she is on your screen, but Peggy, why don't you wave to make it obvious for people to see you? Peggy is involved in the Seacoast Interfaith Sanctuary Coalition. And Peggy, maybe I'll let you explain a little bit more about what that is, just so we're all aware in case people are not sure. She's also a member of Community Church in Durham and has Lutheran roots, with her parents being missionaries in Hong Kong in the 50s. She is also works with, has her own, is it your own consulting business or is it with a consulting business?
It's mine.
It's her own, with nonprofit organizations on strategic leadership. Was that what it was?
Strategic planning.
Strategic planning. Thank you very much. Maybe we'll have a conversation tomorrow. She lives in Dover, has 2 grown kids and 1 grandkid. And like many grandparents that I hear from, that grandkid is the light of their life. So Peggy is here to give us a talk on immigration, Detention 101. What is going on nationally, with specific interest in what is going on here locally in our community. So Peggy, I'm going to turn it. She will end up sharing her screen at some point. Maybe at this point, if we could have everybody mute themselves if they haven't already, and we will have time for conversation afterwards, and we'll be able to chance to unmute ourselves then. So Peggy, if there's anything else you'd like to add, go for it. Otherwise, take it away.
Thank you. I'll just add one thing, and that is that I'm joined by 2 of my compatriots from SISC, Amy Perry, who is also in the Seacoast Interfaith Sanctuary Coalition from First Parish Church in Dover, and Nancy Pierpont, who is pretty much everywhere in the state where anything is happening that's important around immigration. Nancy is there, usually leading the way. She's also a member of Madbury UCC Church and a member of SISC. So it's great to have them here to help me out if I get stuck. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll walk through this. And let me just do that first, lest I get stuck. Okay, can you see that? I hope. Okay. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. So thank you for being here and making this time. Thank you for caring about this issue. Actually, I know that your congregation has a long history, and not just a theoretical understanding of immigration, but that you've got people who really matter to you and who have been part of your worship and who've been sharing your building for a long time. So I think that you're starting from a knowledge point that's probably way ahead of a lot of folks. And so I appreciate that and appreciate your solidarity with your Indonesian friends and neighbors in particular. So you're probably, in spite of everything else that's going on in the world, you're hearing lots of stuff on the immigration front. We had horrible news today, the headline about all of the children who've been separated from their parents, and now we can't find the parents. You've probably heard about an ACLU lawsuit that had something to do with Strafford County Jail, and you may be wondering what that's about. You may have heard Dot talk about host homes for people coming out of detention. Certainly, they're in the news all the time are stories of mass deportations, and we just had another major deportation this past week, where an entire plane of people were filled with folks from 2 countries and taken back to those countries, despite knowing that when they got back, they would probably be imprisoned or tortured. You also hear about medical abuses in detention. That was the headline, I think, 2 weeks ago. And on the good news side, that you may have heard about the car rallies that are happening at the jail. So in the midst of all of this that's going on, what I hope that we can do tonight is cover in the short time that we have together 3 things. So one is some real fundamentals, what's happening with detention. The second is how are faith communities in the Seacoast and across the state responding? And then the third piece is what can you do that would make a difference? So I think what I will do is go through the whole presentation, and then I'm going to stop my screen share so that I can see all your beautiful faces and we can have a conversation and do question and answer. So First of all, with detention basics, you probably know that Strafford County Jail is an ICE detention site. So ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And so it's the detention center for Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So if you are picked up for an issue related to immigration in one of these 3 states, your first stop will be the Strafford County Jail. If you are picked up someplace else in the country and maybe their centers are full or for a whole variety of reasons, you may be transferred into the jail. So there are typically about 100 people who are being held at the jail for issues related to their immigration status. Right now, that number is lower because of the COVID pandemic. And I'm not actually sure what the number is right now, but it had been pretty consistently at around the 100 mark in the year prior to COVID starting. So the detention center is just one of many sites around the country. There are actually about 200 detention centers in the United States, and they are a mix of people operating those centers. So all these beautiful dots symbolize the type of detention centers that you see. So the black dots are detention centers that are run by for-profit companies. So they're in it for the business, for the dollars that they're going to make for it. And actually about 70% of the people being held in detention are in those privately owned facilities. The red dots are city and county jails, like Strafford County Jail, where there will be, like ICE will have a contract with them for X number of beds, and they will have folks detained there. There are buried in here a few blue dots. Those are run directly by ICE. And then the other thing that you will see on this page are some purple hands holding a purple heart. And those are the places where there are jail visitation programs operated by volunteers, similar to one that I'll tell you a little bit about that's happening at Strafford County Jail. So whether you are at a site in Houston, or you're a site in Kansas, or you're at a site here in New Hampshire, there are a number of things that will be true for you regardless. And one of them is that it is very likely that you will be transferred at some point when you are in detention. So if you're not immediately deported, you may be transferred, and when you're transferred, it's typically with no notice. So it could be daytime or nighttime. Come on, you're going. You're not told where you're going, and you are not, throughout your period of being detained, typically you're not even outside to see where it is that you're going. So we had a friend recently in New Hampshire that SISC was lucky enough to get to know. And in his case, he started out at a site in California, then he was transferred to Florida, then Louisiana, then Alabama, then up to New Jersey, then to Georgia, back south, then up to Boston, and then finally to Strafford County Jail. So you may be transferred a whole bunch of times. And again, often with no clear understanding of where you're going or why in the world you're being transferred. And that's important to keep in mind, because as we talk in a minute about the importance of legal representation and connection to the community, you can imagine how hard it is to find an attorney, build your case, build connections in the community if you're being moved from one state to another It's also super hard for your family members and loved ones to know where you are. But all of that, with that in mind, the more important thing to know is that every one of those places, all of those people that we talk about, they're just people. So it's men and women, it's little kids, it's old people, it's people with huge, gregarious personalities, it's people who are very introverted and shy, people coming in hopes of a better life and new beginnings. And, their identity is not being immigrants. They weren't born with the status you are someone who's in deportation or you're an immigrant. They were born with a name like us, and a face and a story and a personality. And it's important that we remember that as we talk through these next slides. So how is it that they came to be in detention? So why are they being detained? There are three big reasons that people are detained. So one is that they've come requesting asylum. So asylum is something that is internationally guaranteed. International law says that that is an important value universally, and that if you have a well-founded fear of persecution in your home country that is due to your race, your membership in a particular social group, a political opinion, your religion, or your national origin, that if you have a well-founded and personal fear, you personally are at risk, you may apply for asylum. And typically you are required to wait until you are in this country to make that application. And very often what happens is that when you present yourself at the border, you say, I would like to apply for asylum, the next thing that happens is that you're detained. Some people are in detention because they came to this country without documentation. They never had it. And those tend to be the people that you hear about most in the news, but they're only a part of this story. And then the third would be people who have been in the country. They came in, they had all the paperwork originally, but they violated some term of their status. So this was true for many of our Indonesian friends in New Hampshire and the Seacoast. So they came in on tourist visas, many people did, and then overstayed their visa, or they didn't realize the time limit that they had for filing their application for asylum. So they might have missed that. So they, in their cases, had been in the country for a very long time, and then were suddenly being detained, deported, and threatened with deportation. The other thing to understand is that the way that we're managing immigration and detention now is new. The policies and systems we have in place are different from what we've had historically. So on the far left side of this graph, if you can see it, is 1994. And at that point, we had fewer than 7,000 people were being detained on issues related to immigration. But by 2018, that number had jumped to 38,000. And I just got the new numbers for 2020. We are now currently detaining 60,000 people for immigration issues in our country. And that does not include the children, unaccompanied children, who are in kind of a different system within the system. So we are detaining an enormous number of people. It's enormous not just because the number's big, but it's enormous for us as a country. And there are many reasons for that. Certainly there are reasons related to changes in people's home countries where you have wars and civil strife, and you have climate change and economic issues. But a major driver of this increase has been policies that were put into place in the 1990s that dramatically increased who was deemed to be appropriate to be in detention, and said, you know, if you don't have your status, you shouldn't be in the community while you're working through the system. Instead, you should be in jail. And then the third big dynamic that has influenced this is the introduction of the for-profit prisons. Because as businesses, it's in their self-interest financially to have a lot of people in detention. That's how they're making money. And they have a pretty strong lobbying presence in Washington, which means that they are influencing also the policies that are put into place. So what's it like when you're there? The answer to that question is it depends. We are told that the Strafford County Jail is the good detention center to be at. So I think that the folks who run that detention center are really trying to do a good job, and they are providing for people's basic needs. And so in that way, it is, of the options, if you have to be detained, it's one of the better places to be detained. However, there are also other places that are at the opposite end of the spectrum, and there are a lot of them. So there are places where you don't have access to water, you don't have access to soap, you don't have access to medical care, you may have too little food, you may be in freezing cold cells. So it's all over the place. And the reason they're so varied in that is that there are standards for detention sites, but there are actually 3 different sets of standards. And there are some sites that aren't following any of the standards. When the standards are raised, if you already have a contract, you're not required to meet the improved situation. It's okay to just be doing what you were doing before. We also know that it's well documented by independent sources that the inspections that are done are often extremely flawed. So the bottom line is that we end up with a whole lot of people in terrible conditions, life-threatening sometimes conditions, conditions that go on and on, allowed to continue partly because nobody knows it's happening. So it's silent, there's no sunshine on that. Regardless of the site that you're at, things that are common across all the sites are that if you are being detained, you will have little or no access to telephones or to visits. If you are in detention, you not only may be at a for-profit prison, but the communication systems within prisons are also for-profit companies, which means that you have to pay money in order to be able to make phone calls. And so you also have to be able to afford to make those calls or afford to have video visits. And there are some sites where no personal visits are allowed even prior to COVID, and some where you're only allowed to have video visits. It's highly likely that the information you receive on what your rights are will be given to you in a language that you don't understand. It's usually in English, sometimes not, but often. And you have no guarantee of pro bono legal services. So that's something that you have if you're a citizen and you're going through our criminal justice system, you have a right to an attorney. That's not true if you are being detained on immigration status issues. So that's really important to know, because what it means is you have to know that you have a right, that you can have an attorney. You have to be able to find an attorney, and you have to be able to pay an attorney. And we know that only about 14% of people who are being detained have attorneys. And that's really critical because we also know that people who are being represented by attorneys are 10 times more likely to have their status granted and be allowed to stay. During COVID, things are worse. So I promise we'll get to the good news, but right now we're in the bad news part of this presentation. So during COVID, it's horrible. So, there are just over 200 detention sites around the country, and half of those have reported cases of COVID-19. And it's tough to keep yourself safe. We know we're supposed to wash our hands. We know we're supposed to wear masks. We know we're supposed to have access to testing. We know that if you're sick, you're supposed to isolate. All of those things are really virtually impossible to do if you're being incarcerated. In addition, most places have shut down access from the outside, so there are no visitors. You might be able to make phone calls or video calls if you can afford it. And many of the court hearings are on hold, so your case is also likely to be just in holding pattern. So across the state, again, with many thanks to Nancy Pierpont, who has been trumpeting this call to action for a long time now, we in faith communities said, oh my God, that can't be right. There has to be something that we can do, because this certainly is not what we have, as I think people of faith grown to believe, is how you treat one another. And so we're taking action, and we hope that we can make a difference. So one of the places that we know we can make a difference is for the folks who are at the Strafford County Jail. So most of the people who leave the jail will leave because they've been deported. But some are eligible for release, but they have to meet all of these criteria in order to be released. So no criminal charges or convictions in the past, and that rule just got tightened to include a whole bunch of other stuff this week. They've been deemed not dangerous, they're not a flight risk. They must have some path or potential path to legal status. They have to be able to post bond. They have to have affidavits of support from the community, and they have to have a place to live. So this is where we come. Whoops, I'm going to go back. So I'm going to circle in on a couple of these in particular. So the piece around being able to post bond, the minimum bond is $1,500. And unlike if you're in the criminal system where, you pay 10% often to be bonded out, you have to have the full amount. And unfortunately, most of those bonds are not $1,500. They're often much, much higher, thousands of dollars in order to be bonded out. And keep in mind that you're in detention because you are fleeing a bad situation and often have very little or no money. You have to have affidavits of support. So people in the community who will say, if you are released from detention, we will help to support you and connect you with the broader community. And you have to have a place to live. So all of these standards have to be met in order to be released. So a lot of work has started to evolve around the state to try to respond to this. The American Friends Service Committee and the United Church of Christ New Hampshire Conference came together and said, what can we do? And they formed a jail visitation program. Prior to COVID, they were able to have volunteers go into the jail every week, learn who's there, meet with them, find out what was happening for them, make sure that those folks had basic information. The ACLU was also able to go into the jail and identify people who had cases where they had a pretty good chance of moving forward, and where there were cases that were part of a broader issue that would impact a lot of folks. So the UCC formed a committee called IRSG, which, Nancy, I still don't have trouble rolling that off my tongue. So it's the Immigration and Refugee Support Group. And they were really in this leadership role in the jail visitation program. They also started raising dollars so that they could help people to pay those bonds, that they could help with some financial support after a person left detention sometimes, and so that they could help put money in a commissary account. Because if you have $20 in a commissary account, then you can make a phone call. You can do things, let your family know where you are. But folks who don't have that money were really struggling. And so they started this fund. At the same time, the Unitarians also started a fund specifically focused on bonds. And these two bond funds have been helpful then to people who we get to know through the jail visitation program, so that if they meet all those various criteria, they have the potential to be released. In addition, IRSG has taken the lead on education to help folks like me learn more about immigration and what's going on. And they have started a network of host homes throughout the state, and people throughout the state who are providing post-detention support. So this is really where we come in. So for those of us in the Seacoast and in SISC, we're working on helping people to be able to post bond, have people in the community who pledge to provide support to them, and have a safe place to live. This is really grassroots, super grassroots. There is no fancy organization making all this happen. Sometimes it's an individual up in the Lakes region who lives in a cabin in the woods who says, I'll help. Sometimes it's a coalition that forms, like the folks down in Keene with Project Home. Sometimes it's an individual church or a temple who will say, we want to be involved. And in the Seacoast, the path that we took is to bring together faith communities into something we're calling SISC, which is short for Seacoast Interfaith Sanctuary Coalition, to say we want to lend support. So SISC consists of these 8 communities. So First Parish, Dover Friends Meeting, so the Quakers in Dover, Community Church, which is UCC, Gonic Friends, that's another Quaker group, the Unitarians at South Church in Portsmouth, you folks, Madbury Congregational, Temple Israel in Portsmouth, and then individual community members in throughout the Seacoast who are not part of a faith community. And we're doing a number of things. So we know people need to have bonds, so we've been raising money for the bond fund. We know they need a place to live, so we have started to offer host homes, and during the COVID pandemic, sometimes that means providing a quarantine housing. We have also then gathered these communities of people to provide support to the individual and to the host home provider. So in the model that we're using, you have somebody who says, I'll provide a host home to someone coming out of detention. And then the people in the faith community, and often from other faith communities, say, we'll help. So we will help with whatever needs to be done. We're also constantly trying to learn and educate ourselves and those that we know in our faith community. We're trying to advocate for a better system, because while it's really important to help these individuals, and that's compelling, the tragedy is the scale on which this is happening across our country. We've got 60,000 people in detention in an unfair system. And ultimately, what's going to make things better for individuals is if we change that system. And we are doing our best at SISC to stay connected with the other groups in the state. So where does that bring you? How can you help? So there are 4 ways that you can help. The first is to raise your voice. So anything that you learn about immigration, talk to somebody, because I bet they have no clue. So talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, let them know what you're learning about what's happening, because this stuff thrives because nobody knows. Sign up to help us advocate and support our friend in Durham, whom we are currently hosting, who is being threatened with deportation. There's a whole lot going on through the community church in Durham to support this individual, and we continue to look for volunteers to support us in that work. Share what you learn. The weekly car rallies are still going on. So the Jericho walks in Manchester are not happening because of the pandemic, but the car rallies are happening. So you can go there. It's really pretty cool to do. You get in your car, you do a virtual Jericho walk or drive around the jail, and you can actually see people who are in detention who are waving from the windows. Write letters. So write letters to the editor, write letters to your congressional representatives, let them know that you care about this issue. And please, 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 if you haven't already, vote. You can also join one of the support teams. So as I mentioned, we're hosting someone, the Durham Community Church is hosting someone, and we have a support team that provides a lot of different kinds of support to him. In his case, he speaks fluent English, but in some situations you might have a guest who speaks French, or you might have a guest who speaks one of the Scandinavian languages. And it's amazing to me how many languages we have access to in the Seacoast, and we need to tap into folks who can help with that. If you're being hosted in a host home, you just need companionship. You probably don't know a soul in the community, and so you need somebody who will have a cup of coffee. You can help to raise funds. You can help with providing rides, lots of really concrete, tangible ways to provide support. You can also become a temporary host home provider. So if you are a host home provider, your job is to provide a place that this person can live and 3 meals a day. And then you, with your faith community support team, provide the other kinds of support. And it's important to know you do not need a fancy house. You do not need a big house. You need a house that has a bedroom where the individual can have the bedroom space to themselves with a door that closes and access to a bathroom. You do not have to be a good cook. You just have to be a cook that can put 3 meals on the table each day. And if paying for meals for an additional person is a barrier, that again is where the support teams can come in to try to make that possible. So lots of opportunities for being host homes. Often, right now, there are not as many because people are not being released from detention because of the pandemic, because the cases are all kind of stalled. But there are some people who have been released, and as that day that we're all waiting for comes, when the pandemic is over, the need again for host homes is going to escalate. Certainly your dollars can make a difference. For $28.50, you can make it possible for somebody to have enough money in their commissary fund in the jail so that they can make a phone call, buy some extra food, get something warm to wear. You can make a donation that contributes towards the bond fund. You can help with supporting living expenses after an individual leaves detention. You can help with attorney fees. Right now, we have an individual, this gentleman that we're hosting, who needs to be able to make his case, and that means thousands of dollars in attorney fees, and we need to help him be able to pay that. The dollars for once after a person is released, one of the things you need to know that's important there is that if you've been released from detention, you have to wait an entire year, a full year, before you can apply for permission to work. So that means you have 1 year when you are legally not allowed to bring in income. And what we have found from people that we have known in the past is that as soon as they are able to work, they're there. And they are anxious to work, they're anxious to be independent, and they very quickly move that direction. But right now, we have a huge barrier because it used to be you had to wait a shorter period. Now you have to wait a year. So ways to help: raise your voice, join the host home support team, one of them, form a host home support team at Holy Trinity, provide a host home through one of your members at Holy Trinity, or make a financial donation. So lots of opportunities. And to find out more, you can go to your very own Kasich, who knows a whole lot about these things and would love to plug you into ways that are a good fit with whatever your talents are. Or you can certainly email us at seacoastsanctuary@gmail.com. And I'll just close by saying that I had a conversation today with someone who said that a Quaker friend had said, you know, I'm not an expert in immigration policy issues. I don't know what the rules should be, but we have policy people, we have representatives who are, and it's their job to raise the issue around policy. I'm not an attorney, so I can't tell you the ins and outs of all the legal stuff. So, but the attorneys can do that. But I am a person of faith, and I can say from that place that I think it's wrong for parents and children to be separated. That I think it's wrong that when someone enters our country, that they are greeted with the kind of detention system that we have now. And I think as a person of faith that we can and that we should do better. And that was encouraging to me because it means we don't have to be experts. We just need to know, why are we doing this and what do we think is right? So I'm going to now stop talking, and I would love to have your questions and comments. And please unmute yourselves so that we can talk.
I'm going to start and just say thank you, Peggy. So informative. I have a lot of thoughts and questions myself as you go through this, but Your knowledge and the way you're able to articulate it and present it, I so greatly appreciate it, because it is so many things going on, and yet I felt I was able to understand more of what it is and more of what's wrong with it. I remember preaching once, and I know people from church remember, and immigration had come up, and I said, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
But along what you were saying, I know as people of faith, I know what our answer cannot be, and that is go home.
Yeah.
That's not an option as Christians, is to shut the door and say, not our problem. And so I appreciate the fact you're making us aware of what things are, and for me, taking off blinders and being more aware of it. So thank you. So as Peggy said, I'll let you facilitate the conversation. Peggy, I'll step out of the way. I just wanted to say thank you. And as she said, if people want to unmute themselves, and I don't know if you want them to raise their hand, you can call on people. Everybody should have their names up.
Sure, let's do that.
But I'll let you take it from here again, Peggy. Go ahead, or whoever else wants to speak.
So I don't know if you're actually Joe. I think you're not Joe.
She's Joe and I'm Russ.
Russ, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful information, Peggy. A couple of things. What's involved in the affidavit of support that you mentioned is one of the conditions of release. And the second question is a different question. What's the ostensible reason for all these transfers across the country? I say ostensible because I assume there may be something else going on.
Well, I'll start with your first question. The affidavit of support is a letter. So it's a letter to the judge that says that we, in our case, it's the SISC volunteers and it's the host home and the faith community, that we will be this individual's support network for as long as they need us if they are released, so that we will help them with basic expenses, but we're also going to help them be connected to the community. In terms of why people are moved from place to place, sometimes it has to do with crowding. So one facility is too crowded, and so they move people, or they didn't have room for somebody to be there, so they maybe were there briefly and then they moved them someplace else. Sometimes it's because they are scheduling a plane for people going to a particular country. So in our case, Pease is actually a staging site. And so they might bring people to the jail in Dover for a short period of time while they get enough people to fill a plane to take them to the plane that's going to then deport them. So sometimes it's those things. I have to tell you that it's really hard to understand how this could not also be just part of a system that really doesn't want people connected to local communities. It's hard to understand why you would be moved again and again and again, and in that way with no notifications.
Okay, thank you.
Peggy, yeah, sometimes you have to understand on a humanitarian level too. Every time an immigrant is in the facility, they begin to make a support network for themselves, friends for themselves within the jail. And so every time they're moved, they are re-traumatized because they're pulled away from the support network that they were building where they were. And sometimes it is retaliatory why they're moved. If they file a complaint against the facility or against ICE, they're often moved to do that. I was on a call today where I learned about how an immigrant was their family and friends were told that the immigrant would not be deported by ICE. And ICE, one thing to understand is that ICE is legally allowed to lie. So they did tell the congressional representatives that that person would not be deported. And then that very night came in the night, as they always do, in the middle of the night, wake somebody out of their sleep to go to put the person on their way to detention. So there's a lot of evil really associated with the system, and there's no way to make that sound pretty or calm or anything like that. It's just there is a lot of evil associated with the system.
Mm. What else are you wondering?
Yeah, I got a question. They're held in prisons. What is their, I mean, I assume they're kept separate from the general population of the prison, or how is that? How would their experience be different than somebody who's in prison for, I want to say breaking the law, or for, violent crimes, or for other things, right? That isn't
We
just.
have various units in the jail: H, G, A, B. H is for people with charges on their records. G for convictions on your record if you're male. J had been for immigrants with nothing on their record. And then we had A for women with charges or convictions on their record, and B for women with nothing on their record. But all of that is bypassed if you have any kind of an issue. This week we had an issue. I have talked to the public defender for this immigrant who says he's completely innocent, but he's been charged and convicted with felonious sexual assault against a child. And the public defender says he's up all night because he knows that the immigrant is innocent, but he couldn't free him from that. So the next thing you know, there's a skirmish in the jail, and because nobody wants to be next to a convicted pedophile. So he's changed out of the unit to a different unit, and he may be mixed in, and they are mixed in with citizens if they have any charges or convictions on their records.
I think it's really important to emphasize that most people are not there for doing horrible things.
Right.
The reason they're being detained is because they don't have papers that say that they can be in this country. And so the press makes you think that it's all dangerous people. And that's actually, there are some, but that's not the norm.
No, I've seen, actually less crime rates from immigrants living in the country than there are from native-born Americans.
That's right.
Say that.
They have a lot to lose,
But yet they're being held in a prison with those people who have broken the law. So that's what I was wondering: how are they kept separate or treated different? Because they do have a different situation, whether public recognizes that or not. So just wondering, they're being.
I mean, basically, they're not treated differently. They may be in a separate unit, but the treatments, it's still the same jail. It's still the same policies. It's still the same facility. It's still the same staff.
The officers who get to work with the unit of men that have no charges or convictions on their record, which Peggy is right, is the largest unit where largest place by population where immigrants are kept. Those staff are happy to be there because the people that are in that unit are just so easy to work with.
Peggy, what has been the experience with the bond fund? And by that I mean, have we had any people that have defaulted and the fund has been forfeited?
No, not to my knowledge.
Good. Okay, so we can tell people that it's a safe place to contribute money to.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that, but it doesn't replenish itself quickly because these cases take a long time to go through.
But you haven't had the experience of losing money because someone has fled or defaulted in appearing?
I mean, Nancy, I'll look to you to. My understanding is that no one has defaulted.
On appearing? On
appearing with someone who received bond money from the IRSG funds and the.
Oh, so have we ever had anybody default on a bond?
Correct.
Not with the group money. When we were first trying to figure out how bonds work, some of the individual members of the group did bond people out. And there was a couple people that I wouldn't have recommended for bond that did default, but
this group has had a good experience with the bonding program.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
yeah, we have really good return rates for the bonds.
Yes.
What's the rationale for not being allowed to work for a year?
I'd love to know the answer to that question. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. Because
allegedly maybe because you don't want those people taking our jobs.
Maybe.
I think it's just a way to make everything hard. One of the people that we knew somehow got across the Canadian border. I'm not really sure how, but they get a work authorization very quickly, within a very short time there. And so our system is really kind of a punishment system.
Mm-hmm.
Harassment.
More than sort of.
Are there systems in other countries that are doing this better? And what are they doing better than what's currently being done here? So if you could change our system, how would it? Obviously, it needs to be changed, right? What are those things? Or what are those models that we need?
It's not the model from another country. It's the model from this country that existed before 1996.
So we were doing a lot of things right.
Okay.
For a while. Not everything right, but a lot of things right.
So what are some of those things that could you just help me understand more? What are some of those things that you say we were doing right that we're not doing anymore that we could go back to then?
I think one thing is, allowing people to live in the community while their case works its way through the court system. Allowing them to work during that time, allowing them to have a driver's license so they can get to work. Doing those kinds of things, I think, can be really helpful. Not separating parents and children, that would be a good thing. If someone is detained, to make sure it's a good facility. Certainly for people who are fleeing in fear of their life, people applying for asylum, that we should be trying to make it possible for them to be here, not trying to keep them out.
I wanted to know.
If you talk to World War II veterans, they often talk about sponsorship. And I hate to use that word because in our present context, when you're talking about sponsorship, you're often talking about taking complete financial responsibility for someone. When we're talking about host homes, we're not talking about that. We're talking about sponsorship as it was used back then in World War II, which is you step up, maybe your church steps up and says, we're gonna look after this one person. Doesn't mean you're legally responsible. It means you're giving them a home and helping them learn English and helping them integrate into the community, and doing all those things in the hope that they win their asylum case and we'll be able to welcome them in as citizens, which I had the pleasure of doing this past March, attending an asylum hearing and hearing the immigration judge say, "Welcome to the United States of America." Mm. And you just can't understand how joyous those words are until you walk the path with someone and see how hard it is, and can really appreciate the accomplishment of that.
I think Margareta had something, and then Dr.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what we are currently doing at Holy Trinity. I know, Dot, you have been involved, and how many people are involved at this time from Holy Trinity, and what are we doing?
Well, that's a really good question. We are not doing very much. And part of that is because we have been put on hold from COVID. But behind the scenes, there are several people who have been working on these things. Pam Shaw, for instance, and I both, Peggy trained both Pam and me to be, what were we called, companions for the sanctuary apartment?
Yeah, that's a good word.
Like that. But I wanted to say, Holy Trinity, those of you, I'm looking at all of us who are on the screen, and it looks like Kurt and I are the longest members here. We've been part of Holy Trinity longer than I think anybody else. Maybe Alice, maybe you've been a member a long, and yeah, maybe. Anyway, Holy Trinity used to be a sanctuary church. For many years, we had one after another people from mostly Thailand and Vietnam. After the war era, there were people from Holy Trinity who got together and sponsored, found an apartment for, and then helped with all of the kinds of things that Peggy's been talking about, the practical things, introducing them into the community, welcoming them to our church, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have not done that. I think maybe the last time we did that was just before Pastor Lynn arrived. Is that right, Nina?
No, it was after, I think, because I was here already. We came with the Optibex.
Mm-hmm. And were we sponsoring someone at that point?
The guy who did the the sculpture.
Yep. And then, of course, in the first year that Pastor Lynn took over, the Indonesian congregation came to us, so that we have had a close relationship with them and with their problems ever since that. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of corporate knowledge about sponsoring people within this community, but recently not a lot of action.
At all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that there's so many ways to help. And I think the question becomes, what's the right one for you?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the right one for Holy Trinity? What's the right one for you as an individual? And I would encourage you to just listen to your heart and do the thing that you think you can do with joy. And we would welcome you with open arms in joining us in that work. And I have to tell you that most of us were starting from square one in terms of knowledge. And so this is a learn as you go game here.
Mm-hmm.
But the rewards are great, particularly the rewards when you get to actually talk to someone, get to know someone who brings the rich diversity of the world into our community. That's a gift. It's a real gift.
Well, we're nearing the 8 o'clock hour. I think we are going to have to wrap this up, but Peggy, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
She is really almost 100% responsible for putting this presentation together as well.
No, that's not true, actually. Amy Perry was there, Nancy.
Wave, Amy. Amy, wave.
And Jill Taylor.
Team effort.
She's not here.
But
And
thank you.
Charlotte Ramsey too. So we had quite a little team there.
Well, thank you all for caring about this and for all the ways that you show up in the world. And I look forward to getting to know you better.
On that note, thank you, everybody. Peggy, again, a deep, heartfelt thank you. Amy and Nancy also, as you're here from that organization. Thank you for your work, Dot. You as well. See you, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thanks
a lot.
Bye-bye.
All right.